Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. August is now over, so let's go and wrap it up. So my August was a bit hit and miss in some ways, I suppose. We'll go through the normal kind of routine here. I'll do the stats first of all and the timestamps down below so you can skip that section if you want to, and then we'll go and have a look at the books themselves. But I read 6 books and 1 novella in August. There were no DNFs. I think that's the first month for a little while that I've not actually had a book that I felt the need to DNF, so that's obviously a good thing for me. As far as the stats go, I added 3,044 pages to my yearly total last month, which takes me up to a year-to-date figure of 25,607. The average page count that I had for the books that I read in August, not including the novella, which as usual is taken out of this part of the stats, was 473, which takes the average year-to-date to 526. The average rating was a little bit down. It came in August at 3.86, and the average year to date has slipped ever so slightly therefore to 4.02. As far as the series stats goes, I've now got 13 different series that I've started this year that I've actually intended to carry on, because in this part of the stats I don't include the not continuing section, of which there are 9 year to date so far. I've got 3 series finished, so no additional series finished in August, but I've got a couple lined up for September. The overall series that I've got ongoing is 37, and of those I'm up to date with 19. And then the happy little small number at the bottom there is the days since the last 5-star read, which this month is sitting at 2 days as of the time of filming. So into the books themselves, and as usual I'm going to start off with a couple of books that I read for SPFBO. These ones do not have a rating. I have rated them, I've just not made those ratings public, and I won't do until I release or announce my semi-finalists for the competition, which is coming up very soon on the channel. These ones have been included into the stats though, because as I said, I have given them a rating myself. First up though for August was Strangers in the High City by J.E. Cabrera. This one I did a buddy read with one of my friends on Discord, Chad, and we quite enjoyed it. He enjoyed it I think a bit more than I did, but I think that maybe he's a little bit more forgiving than I am. Overall though, the story itself, the overall kind of story experience, if I can separate that side of it, was very good. It was an interesting world, it was interesting characters and setup and everything, and I did overall have a good time with it. So with this one we've got, it's kind of listed as having 3 point of view characters, all male, but in the book itself there are a few more who have point of view chapters. So there's a female character who, to be honest, I found one of the most interesting characters in the book. She had a few point of view chapters, but then kind of dropped off and disappeared a little bit at various points of the book, so that was perhaps a little bit frustrating for me. And then we've got a couple of others who maybe had just 1, sometimes 2 point of view chapters throughout the book. So that seemed a little bit almost confused for me. You've got your 3 main characters and then a smattering of others, and I think it would have been a little bit better if we could have condensed that to just the 3, possibly 4 main characters overall, or point of view characters overall. With that one though, the other characters who you did get were there to give you a bit of extra information basically. They gave you insight into what was going on in areas that the main characters weren't involved. So obviously you've got that kind of that toss-up really. Do you skip those chapters? Do you have another way of incorporating them? It's a difficult decision to make sometimes. The story itself, as I say, was pretty good. I did quite enjoy it. So we've got a nation which has been put together to kind of combine humans, elves and dwarves, but the dwarves are kind of second-class citizens here. They're used as almost slaves. They're put into the mines a lot and things like that. And on the other side of it, you've got a rebellion from the dwarves basically, because they, funnily enough, they don't like being put to slavery. So you've got a little bit of an uprising there. You've got fighting to put down the uprising, and there's other things that they're fighting for as well. I won't go into too much of the plot detail. I did have a dedicated video review for this, or I do have a dedicated review, which I'll link up in the top corner as usual. But for this one, the thing that I didn't like was the actual writing style. It felt very unpolished. It didn't really feel like it was a finished draft because there were just too many mistakes. And as I said in my video review, once it got to the point that it was really noticeable, it started impacting my enjoyment and taking it down a little bit of a notch. So I did end up cutting this one from SBFBO pretty much because of that, because the story, characters, world aspect, they were all pretty good, to be honest. And then my last read for SBFBO 9 was To Steal the Sun by S.M. Carter, and this one was a South Asia inspired heist fantasy. It had a lot of good world building elements that I really enjoyed, and I liked the characters in here as well. Again, I've got a dedicated video review for this one where you can find out a little bit more, which I'll link in the top corner. I really had a good time with this one though. I do like a good heist fantasy. And for me, this one was a good heist fantasy. It had a nice balance of plans and counter plans and things being foiled, things going wrong, as always happens in, well, a good heist fantasy. You never seem to have a heist that goes straightforward as it should do, because that wouldn't be very much fun for the reader now, would it? Although I'm sure the characters would much prefer that. The characters that I had in here though I did like. Again, it was 3 main characters. There were a couple of side characters as well, but they didn't have the point of view chapters, so it was done a little bit better here. It's kind of easier to do with a story like this, a heist story, because everyone's kind of in the same place. They're all working together. You've got a crew, and the characters, the point of view characters, are all part of this crew. We don't really see the other side, but we don't always need to. You don't need a kind of a bad guy's perspective in a story like this. I thought the world building was quite interesting with some of the magic that you had and some of the, I guess, slightly religious aspects of it. One of the characters is a religious assassin, so you've got a little smattering of that in here as well. Overall, I thought it was a really good book, really enjoyable, fast flowing, and it's definitely one that I recommend. Next up was continuing my buddy read with my friend Nina. We're on The Expanse, so we're coming to the end of it. The last book is in September, so this one for August was book 8, Tiamat's Wrath. And I have to say, I don't really have too much to say about this one. I feel like I've kind of said it before in my previous wrap-ups, especially the most recent couple that I've done for this series, because I mean we're 8 books deep at this point, so I don't want to say too much for spoiler aspects anyway. But my enjoyment hasn't been there with these last few books, and that definitely was the case with Tiamat's Wrath. Part of it is because we're not seeing the same kind of characters and character interactions that really made those earlier books a winner for me, or winners for me. Some of them aren't there because, quite frankly, there's been a couple of books ago now, there's been a time jump, so we're nearly 30 years away from where we started off the Expanse series, and some of the characters, especially characters I really enjoyed, are a bit older and aren't featuring as much because of that. So that was definitely a disappointment. I can understand why that happens, but when those characters were a large part of the enjoyment for me, and they've not really been replaced for my mind, it does take away the enjoyment of the series overall, or at least these books in it. So a very wishy-washy kind of wrap-up for Tiamat's Wrath, but it is, as I say, book 8 in the series, so I don't want to say too much about it because there's another 7 books before it that I might spoil for anyone who hasn't seen them or read them and who may want to. The audio that I'm listening to with these remains very good, so that's definitely a benefit there. But yeah, my enjoyment of the series as a whole has definitely peaked at book 5, Nemesis Games. I think that was 5. And yeah, I'm reading the last book in the series at the moment. I'm about 25% through, and I'm really hoping that it's going to end on a bit of a high for me, because otherwise it'll be a really sort of tainted experience, I guess. I ended up giving 3.5 stars for Tiamat's Wrath because, well, largely because of the credit that it's built up before with the characters in the world. We're continuing with some of the characters, and obviously the world building aspects are continuing and getting a little bit better as we see a little bit more in each book. So that's definitely the high side for me, and that does help to continue a decent score. Otherwise, this one, if it was a standalone, I might have rated it just 3 stars if I'm honest. Next up, we did a buddy read in my Discord. There were quite a few people enjoying themselves reading Awakening, or Obsidian Awakening as some people know it as, by Sienna Frost. This one is another Asian inspired fantasy. There's a lot of characters. I think there's 7 point of view characters in this one, and the author likes to kind of showcase that there's no real good or bad in here. There are no primary protagonists or antagonists. Everyone's kind of a little bit of both. We see a bit of both sides, so there's no real lines drawn in the sand, so to speak. You do have people on opposite sides, but we're not necessarily supposed to root for one over the other. So that was definitely a good thing, and I think was well done in here. Overall, although most people, and in particular in my my buddy read on Discord, although most people seem to be enjoying this one, it just didn't really work for me quite as much. I think those main characters, the 7 point of view characters, were too many for me. I would have preferred to have it pared down a little bit and spend a bit more time with each of them and not have big gaps. The gaps weren't too bad, but not have gaps in chapters featuring characters, so I can continue kind of growing with them and remain invested with them. The main thing that I didn't really like in here was, well, there were two things. There were a couple of action scenes which I just really couldn't get my head around. I'm normally quite good at reading an action scene and kind of visualizing a lot of the elements of it in my head, and that's why I tend to quite like battle scenes in a lot of fantasy, if it's obviously done well. In here though, there were a few things where the description, I was kind of pausing and replaying it, reading it again, trying to get my head around what characters were doing as they were fighting on horseback and swinging underneath the neck of other horses and taking ropes off people and strangling them with them, all whilst in a battle with lots of people around them and things, and it just didn't quite work for me. The main thing though outside of that was the sexual violence that we got in here, where I just really didn't appreciate it. I did mention that in my Discord, and someone commented and said, well, it would be a bit weird if you did appreciate it, and I do get that. But what I meant by it, because it was quite badly worded, was I didn't really think it had a place in here, or not a place in here, but I didn't think that it was necessary to have it in here. A lot of it was just to show the power of a certain character, and it could have been done in different ways, or maybe even off the page. I know people have differing views on like Fade to Black and stuff like that, but we had various points where a female character was sexually abused just to show the power of a male character, whether it was power over that woman or power over other male characters who were watching or not necessarily involved, but they knew it was going on. So I didn't really like that. I didn't think that it was done well here, to be honest, or done for the right reasons. I know it's always a tricky one to have, but for me in here it just really didn't work, to be honest. There was another one which seemed to be just for character development, and that one again really didn't work for me. So overall for me, not the best experience. As I say, a lot of people in my Discord and elsewhere who've read this really enjoyed it, but it didn't work for me quite as well, and I ended up going for 3 stars. Then I picked up An Arc of the Ice by Ryan Carhill. This is a novella which is listed as book 3.5 because that's kind of publication order, and I'm sure I heard him say that you should read it at that point after Of War and Ruin, or after Of Darkness and Light. I can't remember which one actually. Yeah, it's after Of War and Ruin, because that would be book 3 in the series. I think that's more for the characters than anything, because there'll be characters in there who you might not have come across until you've got that far through the series. Chronologically though, it's set in between book 0.5 and book 1, so in between The Fall and Of Blood and Fire. This one tells the story just a little bit ahead of where we are in Of Blood and Fire. We've got Azan and his sons and a few other characters around him going off to find the dragon egg, basically, which is obviously the big catalyst of Blood and Fire. With this one, it was quite a long book. It was longer, I think it's listed as, than The Exile, which was long enough already for a novella. So this one's coming in apparently at about 200 pages. I don't think it felt as long as The Exile, to be honest. It might be because The Exile was split up into kind of 4 little sections, and this one, although it was split up into sections, it was one continuous story. There were a few things that didn't work quite so well for me. There were a number of characters. I think they weren't all characters as in sort of named and stuff, but there were 100, I think it was, who went on this kind of voyage, and various of those get killed. So there's lots of battle, lots of loss and themes around that, which is good. But I felt that there were some elements of it, which I won't spoil, of course, which really didn't quite make sense for me as to the kind of senselessness almost of all of that killing. It's very vague, I know, but it's one of those things I can't really kind of spell it out without spoiling it, which of course I don't want to do. There was another bit I felt like the book had finished. I got to a certain point, thought that's the end of it. I've still got a little bit to go based on the percentage through, so I thought it was maybe extras, but it was actually part 3 when I turned the page. And part 3 for me was a section that I didn't necessarily feel needed to be there. I thought it could have been removed quite easily and just left to our imagination, but we got it all there, and it felt like it was just so one particular thing could be on page, whereas I felt like, as I say, it could have been done in our imagination because we know kind of what happens, but there were markers left leading up to that point which told us this was likely to happen, so it could have been left out as far as I'm concerned. Overall though, with that kind of taken into consideration, it was still a very solid book. That's what Ryan Carhill puts out. He doesn't really do duds, and that's obviously really a good thing. I'm really enjoying the series overall. This one I ended up going for 4 stars because it wasn't quite perfect for me, but it was definitely an enjoyable novella. Next up, I did one of the books that was on my reading list or my reading plan for 2023. I had a bit of extra time in the diary, so to speak, so I picked up An Ocean of Others by Joshua Scott Edwards. I'd previously read the opening chapter of this as one of my first chapter reads videos, and I don't know, I'm kind of conflicted, I suppose, because I liked the first chapter in that. I liked the book, first of all, to kind of spoil the rest of the mini wrap up about it, but it was very different. It was not what I was expecting based on that first chapter, so hence the conflict side of it. It was very interesting. I liked the overall kind of magic side of things and the kind of, I guess, magical creatures, if you like. It's almost a creature of a week kind of story with a very strong ongoing theme through all of them, and we kind of build, so I've seen some people call it a progression fantasy. I wouldn't call it so myself. I've seen people call it a sort of a Dungeons and Dragons type. Again, I can see the elements there, but it's not the description I would give myself. But you do have a group that are formed quite quickly. They're just thrown together and they're sent out on little missions basically to explore these odd happenings, and then we've got these monsters that come into it, and it's announced, or it comes apparent, that these monsters are the sole basis of this organisation being together. Essentially, the missions are always to gather intel and to essentially get rid of these monsters. Obviously it all comes to a head, and you've got your usual kind of betrayals and surprises and revelations, and I think that was all done pretty well. The writing was very good in here. I had no problems with it whatsoever. The characters were pretty decent. I don't think I had kind of a real standout character who I really loved in here. They were all just pretty good, so that's kind of a high and a low, because obviously you do want a really memorable character, and I don't feel I quite had this here, but we did have several memorable moments, which is obviously a good thing. So it was, as I say, a little bit conflicted because I wanted a bit more from it, and if I had my choice, I probably would have gone more along the lines of the first chapter. That's what really got me invested in this, and then very soon afterwards things changed and it wasn't going off in the path that I thought it was going off in. So I can say I'm slightly disappointed at that, but overall the book itself was a very good, very enjoyable one. I ended up giving this one 4 stars. And then the last book of the month that I read was a review copy sent to me by the author. This one is Sea of Souls by N.C. Scrimgeour. This has just come out at the end of August, I think it was. Yeah, I think it must have been towards the end of August because I read it just after it came out, actually. This one is a little bit different for me, perhaps, depending on how you look at it. It's a Scottish-inspired or Scottish folklore-inspired story. So you've got Kelpies and Selkies in here. Selkies being the most important. I don't know why I left them second. You've got various other things in here, wraiths and things like that, which all lead to a really good kind of world building aspect. I really enjoyed that. I quite like the characters that we got in here as well. We've got a main character who starts out on a ship. She's a navigator on a ship, and she's been brought home, essentially. She's received a letter to say that her mother's dying, and she's got almost a dying wish. She's got a secret, essentially, that she wants to share with her daughter. So she's always felt that she doesn't belong. She left home to try and find herself, basically, find her purpose in life. So she's reluctant to go home, but she wants to obviously see her mother before she dies and find out what it is her mother wants to tell her. There's a bit of animosity when she arrives because her brother feels kind of betrayed. He was left 7 years ago by her. And you've got some kind of small elements with her father as well, along those lines as well. And then things really heat up, and we've got the introduction of the Selkies, and you start to learn a lot about them. You've got the almost horror aspects of the wraiths and things like that, and it's a really interesting kind of opening. It's quite a dark opening to the story, both in terms of the initial opening to the prologue and also the shall we call it the inciting incident of the ongoing story. I liked that story overall. I thought it was very interesting, very enjoyable. I loved the world in it, and as I say, the characters all did really well for me as well. Overall, I was very, very pleasantly surprised by this book. I thought I might like it. I was obviously hoping to like it. I wouldn't pick it up otherwise, but I ended up really, really having a good time with it. This was my book of the month. It ended up on 5 stars, and I'm really happy about that. So there we go. As I say, a slightly hit and miss August. I was definitely more hit than miss, but maybe the hits weren't quite so hard, and that's why I called it hit and miss. But a really solid end to the month with Sea of Souls. I definitely recommend that one. I'm looking forward to reading more. I will be reading the Waystations trilogy, which is the sci-fi trilogy by the author, in the coming months as well. So I'm looking forward to that even more so now that I've read Sea of Souls. Let me know in the comments down below how you got on with your reading, and if there's any of these that you're thinking of picking up, what are you looking forward to? I'll hopefully see you in the next video sometime soon, but until then, as always, take care of yourselves, read some good books. Bye for now.